It's
If we
2
don't finish
and
this
you're
project by
lying
tomorrow,
in bed
we
staring
are
at the ceiling.
finished.
The room is
I can't
quiet.
believe they put us
the
in this
world
position.
outside has gone still. But inside your mind, there's a conversation playing on loop. One that happened 3 days ago, maybe 3 years ago, maybe just 3 hours ago. You're replaying every word, every pause, every subtle shift in tone. You're rewriting your lines, imagining better responses, rehearsing what you should have said. And no matter how many times the scene ends, your mind hits rewind and starts it all over again. If this sounds familiar, you are not alone. And more importantly, you are not broken. What you're experiencing has a name, a cause, and a deeply human reason for existing. This mental habit of replaying conversations is something psychologists refer to as rumination, specifically a socially triggered form of it. It sits at the intersection of memory, emotion, and self-perception, and it affects millions of people across every walk of life. Understanding why your mind does this is not just an intellectual exercise. It is one of the most compassionate things you can do for yourself, because once you understand the mechanism, you stop fighting yourself, and you start healing instead. So, let's talk about where this begins. For most people who replay conversations habitually, the root is not weakness. It is actually a form of hypervigilance that developed as a survival response, often in childhood. Think about the environments that produce this kind of mental pattern. A child who grew up in a home where words were unpredictable, where a parent's mood could shift without warning, where saying the wrong thing had real emotional or even physical consequences, that child learned to analyze before, during, and after every interaction. Their nervous system was trained to treat conversation as a minefield. Every exchange became data to be processed, reviewed, and filed away in case it was needed for protection later. Even in less overtly difficult households, this pattern can take root. Children who were consistently misunderstood, who felt like their feelings were dismissed, or who were raised by emotionally unavailable caregivers often grow up with a deep, unspoken belief. I have to get this right. Communication becomes high stakes. Being misread feels catastrophic. And so the mind develops its own quality control system, a constant internal review board that evaluates every social interaction long after it has ended. What is remarkable and what deserves real acknowledgement is that this habit was not a flaw. It was intelligence. It was adaptation. Your mind built this system because, at some point, it genuinely kept you safer or more connected. The tragedy is not that you developed it. The tragedy is that the system never received the signal that the danger has passed. So how does this manifest in adult life? In ways that are both subtle and exhausting. You leave a dinner with friends and spend the drive home picking apart something you said. You send an email and then obsessively reread it. Suddenly convinced the tone came across as rude or careless. You have a difficult conversation with a partner, and even after it seems resolved, you lie awake reconstructing it, not to find peace, but to find evidence. Evidence that you were wrong, or that they were wrong, or that something important went unsaid. You mentally rehearse conversations that haven't even happened yet, running through every possible version of how they might unfold, preparing for outcomes that may never come. There is often an element of perfectionism woven into this pattern. People who replay conversations tend to hold themselves to an impossibly high social standard. They want to be understood completely. They want to cause no hurt, leave no ambiguity, and always say the exact right thing at the exact right moment. When reality falls short of that standard, which it almost always does, because human communication is inherently imperfect, the mind tries to close the gap retroactively, as though if you can just analyze the conversation enough times, you can rewrite what already happened. There is also a deep connection between conversation replaying and anxiety. The ruminating mind is, at its core, a mind trying to establish control, When you are anxious, uncertainty feels intolerable. Replaying a conversation is the brain's attempt to eliminate uncertainty, to find the definitive meaning behind what was said, to predict how the other person feels, to know with certainty whether you are safe. The painful irony is that this strategy almost always increases anxiety rather than relieving it, because you are trying to solve an unsolvable problem. You cannot know with certainty what someone else meant. You cannot change what was said. And so the loop continues, feeding on itself, growing louder the more you try to silence it. This pattern also has a profound impact on relationships. When you are consistently caught inside your own mental replay, it becomes difficult to be present. You may find yourself holding back in conversations, carefully editing yourself in real time, afraid to speak freely because you are already anticipating the post-conversation autopsy. Intimacy requires spontaneity. It requires the willingness to say something imperfectly and trust that the relationship can hold it. When that trust is absent, when you believe every word must be measured and justified, connection becomes exhausting rather than nourishing. And yet, here is what the research and the lived experience of so many people reveals. This pattern is not permanent. It is not your identity. It is a learned response, and what has been learned can, with patience and intention, be gently unlearned. The first and perhaps most powerful step is simply to name what is happening in the moment. When you notice your mind pulling you back into a conversation that has already ended, you don't need to fight it or shame yourself for it. You can simply observe it. My mind is replaying this. My nervous system feels unsafe. I am looking for certainty in a place where certainty doesn't exist. That small act of naming creates distance. It shifts you from being inside the rumination to witnessing it, and that shift changes everything. The second is to practice tolerating ambiguity. Most conversations do not have a clean, definitive meaning. Most people are too caught up in their own inner worlds to scrutinize yours the way you fear they are. Allowing a conversation to end without a verdict, letting it remain slightly open, slightly unresolved, is a skill, and it is one that grows stronger the more you practice it. The third is to build what psychologists call earned security, a stable sense of self that does not depend on how every conversation landed. This often develops through therapy, through consistent self-compassion practices, and through slowly accumulating evidence that you are fundamentally acceptable, even when you are imperfect. When your sense of worth is no longer tied to flawless communication, the stakes of every interaction begin to lower, and when the stakes lower, the mind no longer feels compelled to run its endless review. You deserve to live in the present tense. You deserve to have a conversation and let it end, to trust that you are understood enough, that you are loved enough, that one imperfect exchange does not undo everything. The mind that replays is a mind that learned long ago that it had to work very hard to stay safe, but you are not in that place anymore. And part of healing is giving your mind permission to finally, gently, let the conversation go. You said what you said. You meant well, and that is enough.